Hey, 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 welcome back to the Evergreen Marketing Era for Women Entrepreneurs podcast. I'm your host and podcast strategist, Andrea Singletary. If you are a business owner who wants to start a podcast for your business or optimize your podcast for consistent leads and conversions, this is the podcast for you. Okay, I am super, super excited about today's episode. And it's because it's inspired by a question I recently got from a client. And so I had to bring it over to the podcast to answer it because it was just too good not to share. So here's the question. And you're going to get some context here. So she said, I have almost 400 episodes and a lot of my old content is still solid foundational content, but it's pointing to old offers and lead magnets I don't use anymore. Should I go back and re-record those episodes with new information and current CTAs? Or should I just optimize the existing episodes for search? So, for context, most of her older episodes aren't optimized for search. So she was wondering, what is the best way to approach this? Again, this was such a good question, and it's so relevant to business owners who are like in the triple digits with their podcast. At some point, you're going to either pivot in your business, update your messaging, change your offers, or make some other big changes in your business. And so when that happens, you're like, okay, what do I do with my outdated episodes? Do I re-record those episodes? Do I go back through and update all the links? And so let me just say that these are the types of conversations we have in my email community, the Evergreen Marketing Era email community. Like, I'm not here to teach you the basics of podcasting. I'm really here to shift how you view your podcast in relation to your business growth and your overall marketing and sales strategy. And so if you want to be a part of these types of conversations, you need to make sure you join my email list. You can head over to mamaturnmompreneur.com/newsletter. I will also link this below in the show notes. But okay, let's answer this question. Here's what I recommended to my client and also to what I'm currently doing. Truthfully, going back and updating the links to old episodes isn't the best use of your time right now. And honestly, it may not even make sense if you made a major pivot in your business and no longer serve the audience you were speaking to in older episodes. So, for instance, with me, when I first started my podcast, if you are a OG listener, been here since day one, then my podcast used to be called Mama Turn Mompreneur. And so when I started that podcast, I was speaking to beginner mom business owners. Now I speak to experienced business owners and focus primarily on podcasting for your business, podcast strategy, all of that good stuff. And so it doesn't really make sense to go back and update the links in those episodes or point them to different offers because I'm speaking to a different business owner. So a business owner at a different level right now. Because the reality is that for my current offers, a new business owner would not be a good fit. If that is the case with you, it's not going to make sense to go back and update the links or try to optimize those episodes better for search. Now, what I recommend doing is going back through your podcast episode archive to see if any of the topics you spoke on in older episodes are still relevant. So, if they're relevant, I would first look at how they performed and start with those top performing episodes or those episodes that are a central part of like your philosophy, your framework, your approach. Like it's a core part of what you do. And then I would repurpose those old podcast episodes, but not in the way you may think. You're not just going to re-record the episode and change the call to action. You're actually going to do something else. And there's actually 3 different ways you can approach this. So here are 3 ways you can repurpose those old podcast episodes. Number 1 is approach the topic from a new perspective or a fresh take. You have grown since you recorded those old podcast episodes. So you aren't the same person you were back then, which means you have a new perspective on the topic. Most likely you have an updated view on the topic, so you can approach it from a fresh angle. You can even speak about it within specific scenarios or, a certain context. like really getting into the nitty gritty of things. Your listeners love those types of fresh takes. I'm going to give an example. So I actually just supported a accelerator client. It was during her kickoff call, and we were talking about something specific within her niche. And what I loved was like we were planning out podcast episodes, and so like there was a main topic, but she gave me so many different scenarios in which it would be different. Like the information will be relevant to a different person. And so that's what I'm talking about here is that like we have different type of people in our audience. And so how one person views it or how one person approaches it, it may be differently, like different. Like even just thinking from industry to industry, right? We may utilize similar strategies, but how we implement it, it looks different at times based on like what our industry is. So that's what I'm saying here, like really thinking about like the different types of clients you've served and how not each client is the same. They have different scenarios. They have different things come up. Now, the approach or the topic may still be the same, but it's a different angle. So that's what I'm saying here. The next option is if the episode is related to like your framework, your process, your philosophy, update it to reflect what you do now. So for instance, this year I updated my podcast metrics to track as a business owner episode because there are new metrics that I track. And I'm honestly going to have to update it again because I recently added in a couple of other metrics that I'm now tracking. So as I've grown in how I approach my podcast, I'm going to update these episodes where I'm sharing these things with you. So I'm not coming up with a brand new topic. I'm still talking to you about podcast metrics. However, I'm introducing new metrics that you should be tracking that's going to give you more information about your podcast and your podcast audience. Okay. The last way you can approach it is if the topic is still relevant, but maybe you were speaking to a different type of listener in the older episodes, refresh it to speak to your new ideal listener. So look at how this topic is relevant to your current audience. This is especially true if, say, for instance, you went from speaking to, one industry to another industry, or a business owner at a certain level to a business owner at another level. Maybe the topic is still relevant. So for instance, everybody's talking about like the trust recession right now. That's going to be relevant regardless if you're a beginner business owner or a more experienced business owner. It's something that we have to consider in how we're approaching our marketing and our sales. But they're at different levels, right? And so how you speak to a beginner business owner about it is going to be different than how you speak to a more experienced business owner about it. So that's what I'm talking about here is like maybe the topic in general is still relevant, but now you're speaking to a different type of person. So you can still pull from that topic, but you're coming at it from perspective of, okay, now I'm speaking to this person about it. Okay, so those are 3 ways that you can approach repurposing your old podcast episodes. Now, there are some things that I want to note here. You can reference the older episodes in the newer episodes if you want to. And I think this can be really cool if your stance or your approach has changed from then to now. And the content is still going to be valuable, right? Your listeners can still gain something from listening, but this way they will go into it knowing that it is an older episode and that the call to actions are no longer relevant. So if they're looking for, support or a resource and everything, they know to go check out that newer episode because that's going to have the current, ways that you can support them. The other thing is that I would not worry about optimizing the older episodes unless those episodes are relevant to your current audience and you are also planning to update the links. Yeah, the links to like your offers and different things like that you may have mentioned in that episode. And even then, it may not make sense, right? Because if the new offer you're wanting to link to isn't necessarily relevant to that ideal listener for the older episodes, or if the newer offer doesn't connect to the episode topic, it just may not make sense to do that. So this is where you're going to have to basically look at each episode on an individual basis if you want to. I know people will say like, oh, go back and update your old links and different things like that. But if you don't have the capacity to do it, if you're not about to outsource it to someone to do it for you, it just may not make sense. And that's okay. Like I said, after you've hit like the triple digits, it's you may not even like, nah, I'm not going back to deal with that. Like for me, I'm not, because even too, like it was a different podcast name. And like you can clearly hear in those episodes, like I'm speaking to mom business owners, specifically beginner mom business owners. If that's not you, it's not relevant to you. You need to come up to the newer episodes where like this is your area over here. So it's up to you. But again, you just really want to keep those things in mind, because there is some certain things that really go into updating it. Again, especially like if the offer doesn't make sense, like your current offer doesn't make sense to link for that older episode, don't do it, because you're just going to confuse people who discover that episode and they're like, wait, what's going on? Okay. Now, this is a really great approach too if you find yourself in a content rut. So when you start hitting the triple digits, especially like when you get to the 200s and the 300s and everything, it could sometimes be hard to come up with new content ideas, or you may just not feel like coming up with new topics to discuss. Going through like your podcast archive is a great way to generate new topic ideas, but it's like gonna be you creating a fresh take on a topic you've already spoken on. Again, this is where you're gonna be able to come at it from like different angles, or again, if your messaging has shifted, if who your ideal listener is has shifted, well, now you can take that topic, but talk about it from the perspective of like your new audience or your new listener and different things like that. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to, come up with new topics. Like you can literally go through your old episodes and see like, okay, how can I refresh this? Or am I still implementing this thing, or am I doing something different now? And again, it's fun for your audience, especially like your OG listeners who maybe they did hear that older episode. And so they're able to see like your growth and evolution as well. Okay, that's how I recommend approaching older podcast episodes. It depends on the situation. And this is something that we would actually evaluate inside of my Evergreen Marketing Accelerator. I've had clients join when they were in the middle of a pivot or rebrand, and we had to decide on what to do regarding their older podcast episodes. It's better to work smarter, not harder, and see if those older episodes are worth salvaging or just repurposing with a fresh perspective. All right, that is it for this one. Again, if you want to have more of these nuanced conversations about podcast strategy for business owners, make sure to click the link below to join my email list. All right, I'll catch you in the next episode.